So I always knew my parents encountered pirates, and everybody knew everyone else kind of, if you went through, if you were escaping from Vietnam and you went by boat, you likely encountered some sort of piracy. Um, we just all kind of knew, but like we never asked more about it. Nor did they just fully sit us down and tell us, the story. I think it wasn't until not I think, like I actually know, like it wasn't until I sat down and I started writing it that, because if you're writing it, you need to know, okay, well, how do you even get there? And then what happened after?
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Arrivals. Today's guest is Thuy-Anh Nguyen, a lawyer and the author of Resilience. This is a memoir that was inspired by her parents' journey as Vietnamese refugees. In this episode, we talk about preserving family stories, reconnecting with our parents as adults, and honoring the sacrifices that made our own lives possible. This conversation really reminded me of how easy family stories can be lost if we don't take the time to ask questions. And in order to write her book, we got really close to her family story. And it's not only a tribute to them, but also a reminder that every family carries their own stories that are worth preserving. Here's my conversation with Thuy. All right, Thuy, thank you for being here and welcome. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to share.
I want to start with an intro of yourself. How would you describe yourself to someone that doesn't know you outside of professional things?
I guess I would describe myself as someone that's very kind of friendly, like I want to be approachable. Um, it's hard describing yourself, but I do find often that people describe me as just someone who's very approachable and, fun to be around. And I feel that that's sort of my approach to life too, is to make people feel comfortable.
I love that. You live in Ontario, and I'm curious of what your life is like there, and how do you live your day to day today? Just describe it a little bit.
So I actually recently moved back like about a year ago to live with my parents again. Previously I'm originally from Ontario, but went to school in the US. Then I worked for a couple of years, recently in London, and kind of back with my parents. So day to day, currently I'm freelancing, trying to find a career next move, but, it gives me a lot more time with my family, which is the primary reason why I decided to kind of come back and spend more time with them, especially as the parents age and, my nieces are still young and things like that. Just more time with them.
Okay, so you were saying that you moved back with your parents about a year ago. You were in London, and you also lived in the US, which I don't think I knew.
Yeah, so I lived there for law school. I went to law school in the US, and then I worked for a couple years in Chicago, and then I moved back to Toronto to work here and be closer to the family.
How long you were in London for?
Two and a half years. I went late 2022, and then all the way into like the late early 2025. Yeah, so that's why I'm about like a year or so back from London.
And how was it like to live there? Did you like it?
It was great. I always say it was great, like a great city, but it didn't feel like home. So I think, I was spending a lot of time flying back home, right, for like my niece's birthdays or Christmas. And, so I think it was very taxing that way. So I didn't really get a chance to, I think, like settle into the rhythm of being a Londoner, like truly.
Yeah. Did you always kind of knew that you were going to come back, or was this decision made more down the line when you were there?
I would say it was probably more when I was there because when I had initially made the decision to go there for work, like my parents are still, I think, physically healthy. They're just older. But I think every trip that I came back, like you see it a little bit more pronounced. Like when you live with them, you see them every day. You don't see the progression of age that quickly or that easily. But when you come back, let's say half a year later, especially when like they're at their age now, you see a little bit more. Like they move a little bit slower, they're a little bit more frail, they're more gray. And the same with like my sister's kids. Like, they're young. So, you see them grow faster, develop quicker, be more into their own person. So I think as I kept returning home, it just became more pronounced that you know what, like I don't want to miss out on like these years.
Yeah. And you only have one sister that she lives in the US. Where in the US is she?
She's in Buffalo, so very close to us. Where I always say, door to door, we're about like an hour and a half, 2 hours away. So it makes it easy to like, go in, see her as much as possible. The kids are very used to me occupying like a room there. They know they can always come in and, have our slumber parties and stuff.
Yeah. In terms of career, I know you're working freelance right now. You work in with tech companies, correct?
Yeah, so part of the legal tech area. So I'm by trade I'm an IP lawyer. But I pretty early in my career I started moving in the legal tech sort of sphere. So working and these days with AI, how it influences like our legal sector.
And was that a huge career change for what you were doing in London to do what you do now?
No, so it's along the same trajectory. So kind of, I think in terms of my career, when I first graduated law school, I did start off with IP, but that was around 2009. So around that market crash time that we experienced over here. And there wasn't, a lot of jobs. And I think if you ask a lot of people in my sort of industry now, the legal tech field, people just fell into it because, that ended up being where the jobs were. So I started back in, I want to say 2014. Yeah, back in 2014. I started my career in this legal tech sort of area, and that opened the door to moving to London. They hired me for my experience in the area, and it was hard to say no because it's an opportunity for the world.
Right. Yes, of course. And I do want to understand a little bit more of your decision of coming back, and that, like you're saying, is related to, of course, your parents and the changes that you mentioned. But a lot of people don't necessarily make that decision once they live abroad. How uh, have you always been this close to them since you were a kid?
You know what? I think in hindsight, I want to say yes. I think going through it, probably not. Like, you're a teenager, you're a kid, you want your freedom. Um, there's a lot of things that you don't appreciate, but you do more as you age and you see more. We were starting, just this week, we started getting our old home videos digitized. And it was interesting to like watch some of them. I was like, oh, wow. Like I was so different. They were so different. And it's weird to see us like that. And I think when I was living through it, like, you love your family, you love your parents, you love your sister, but um, I don't think I felt close at the way that I feel like now. And looking back at those videos is kind of weird because I feel like I see how close we were, but I just didn't like for some reason didn't intellectualize that or like didn't consciously feel like we were close. We were just, oh yeah, like that's mom, dad. And, they make food for me, pick me up from school, things like that.
Yeah. And when do you think you started getting closer to them? Was it because you lived far away?
I don't know if I can pinpoint that. I think as I started to, you know what? I think as I started to work and consult them more as like they became more of my um sounding board. Because I think when I was younger, it was I don't know if other teenagers can relate, but I feel like, you kind of want to be your own person. Like, you don't want to consult anyone. Like, what's best for you. And then I think I hit a point where, I started asking my dad more for his advice or like my mom more for her advice, right? Like, when it comes to work, I always ask my dad for his advice. I'm like, what do you think of this? Right. And I think as we became more like consultative and like more of a peer, more of like a sounding board, I think we got closer. And the same with my sister, like we're 6.5 years apart. So as I was growing up, when I was in high school, she's still in elementary school. Right. And then it wasn't until she entered college, university and, eventually med school that we connected on like an adult level. And now like we're so close. We're like, she's basically my best friend. So it's, I think it changes as my life progressed, like my perspective changed. And I think I feel closer. I probably always was close. Like, I don't know, this is kind of very theoretical, but I feel like I probably always was close, but I didn't feel it, if that makes sense.
Um, I want to jump in your book because I feel like this is related also, maybe part of the reason why you got closer to your family's history. And your book used resilience. You started writing it during COVID,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So you were in London when you started writing it?
No, I was actually in Mississauga. So I, I, I'm, that would have been about 2 years before I moved to London. So I had, left a job and COVID kind of shut the world down to a certain extent. So I had a lot of time to reflect, on various aspects of life. And then I think that was when I had the time to really like see, you know, we've always just passively say, "Oh, it'd be nice to, document some of your journey." But, you just say it. And my dad's like, "Oh, I'm going to get to it sometime. Like, maybe like I'll write it up for you guys." Um, but then I think at that time, I just felt like, well, seeing everyone get older, my nieces are super young, likely to not know the language. So even if they did spend the time to tell them it, like they're not going to get the same sort of information that my sister and I would get because we understand Vietnamese and her children likely won't have that same degree of the language. Actually, now that, like you brought up the COVID bit, like I'm thinking maybe it was also part of like how life seemed so fragile during that time because I started writing it basically around mid mid to late 2020. So like that peak, that scary, absolutely crazy time of COVID when a lot of people were, really affected. Like it was very lethal then. And that I think that might have prompted me to like, okay, let's start this now. And while I have the time, because, I don't have anything permanent. I can freelance. I can, I have this space now to like write.
Yeah. And did you want it to write before this? Because, not everyone can just say, oh, I want to write a book.
No. No, no, not at all. I never thought I'd be a writer or that I would write anything other than maybe like an exam. So no, I never thought I'd write anything. So this was a little left field, and it it was supposed to really just be like a family archival, almost notebook type thing. But I think because when I started mentioning this to some of my friends, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like we'd love to read it." Thinking, okay, well, I can't really note it down in a notebook and then, pass that around. So maybe I'll try like writing it. And then so I just started to kind of, try.
Yeah. And before this, I'm guessing that your parents told you different parts of their own story through life. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I feel like you've probably heard this too, like just your parents randomly saying, "Oh yeah, I remember when I was like 20, we went here, we did this." So it was very disjointed, disconnected, just this random bit. So I always knew my parents encountered pirates, and everybody knew everyone else kind of, if you went through, if you were escaping from Vietnam and you went by boat, you likely encountered some sort of piracy. Um, we just all kind of knew, but like we never asked more about it. Nor did they just fully sit us down and tell us, the story. I think it wasn't until not I think, like I actually, like it wasn't until I sat down and I started writing it that, because if you're writing it, you need to know, okay, well, how do you even get there? And then what happened after? So you start asking those questions versus, me sitting at a coffee table. I'm like, oh yeah, you remember like we saw those pirates there, and, you just have your coffee and move on from it.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you started officially to write, and you said that you kind of interview your parents in Vietnamese, how was the process like? Did you started to interview them daily, or just starting to write the book?
It was very different than I imagined in my head. So I had this grand sort of idea that, we're going to do this, where I can document it and then, I can share it with like the kids later. So I'm going to buy this, like, I bought SD cards and I was thinking, oh, we'll set up like a camera and, we'll do the interview. But it was never really like that. So I would just be sitting there on the couch, like typing away. I'm like, oh, by the way, like, what happened here? And then that's when I realized, oh shoot, like, I don't have a camera on him, but like they're starting to talk. So I just clicked this, recording app that it has on there. So it was a very impromptu, whenever something, I hit a point where I didn't quite know what came next. Like it was very organic. So, we still have new SD cards lying around because like I just recorded everything as it kind of happened. Um, but it was nice to hear in their words. And I think what made the book nice to write is my dad went through school here, so he's very comfortable with the English language as well. Um, so after I wrote it, I gave it to him to read as a fact checker, in case I had misinterpreted something. So, sometimes he'd say, what do you mean by this part? Right. And I tried to explain it to him, as best I could as, how I meant it. And he would correct me. Or, I think we mentioned, when we spoke earlier, how, there was a story about him being in like the line of fire, and he's like, oh, why didn't you include that story? I'm like, well, you never told us. Like, you know what? I don't know. So it was, it, it felt very collaborative as well. And I think true, like, it felt good because I feel like, I'm writing this so that they can tell their story. And by him being able to go through it, um, it makes it feels better that, yeah, he's happy with it. My mom's happy with it. Whatever it is I'm sharing with my nieces, is in fact accurate, or at least to the best of their memory. It that also fades with time.
Yeah. Yes. I think, well, of course, I'm not that close to the story, but in your book, you even include parts of the story in your mom's voice and your dad's voice, which is makes it, yeah, you give the accuracy sounds that you wanted with that as well.
Yeah, yeah, like a little bit more personalized than just me thinking whatever I'm thinking.
Yeah. So end to end, how long did it took to finish it?
Um, it took, let's see, so I published it in 2025, so like 5 years. I think the majority of it was written in the earlier part, and like the later part of it, because the middle bit I was busy working, so I didn't have enough bandwidth to really focus on it. So, I had an idea of sort of where I wanted to go, like the framework. But I think with the editing, I didn't get a chance to really, go back, get an editor and, get it to the point of like publication until later on.
Got it. And there's different points of the book that I want to touch on. Of course, it's a long story, and to give context also for anyone that's listening, your parents fled Vietnam in 1979 on a boat that could carry about 50 people. I don't know how many people were in the boat with them. Um, and they were traveling together with a son, your brother, when he was only 13 months old. And this is a part that I think it's very heavy and very important to touch on, and I'm sure very hard for your parents to also dig in deeper with you. From what I read on your book, sounds like your parents also held this part of the story in silence for very understandable reasons. So when you approach them to interview them, what was this like? Not only for them, but for you as well, to know more details on losing your brother.
Sorry.
No,
Uh,
you're good. Take your time, and we can
um,
come back to this if you want. You don't have to talk about it right now.
I think, I feel like it'd be hard. I think,
Yeah.
I think it was important for me to have his name in the book as a way to remember him.
Yes.
And to this day, I know my parents, my mom essentially told me that, she doesn't really remember much. And she even recognizes that slightly because of how painful it was. So her memory likely blocked off some of it. Um, and my dad just couldn't. So what I ended up doing was trying to learn more about him, kind of what do you remember about what's a fond memory? I think with my dad, I was trying to understand like how he was as, a baby, like more his personality. But I know, um, when it came to editing, um, he didn't read that chapter. He's like, I'm sure whatever you wrote was fine. So he actually skipped that chapter. And I remember suggesting to him, like, maybe, like, would it be easier if you wrote down what you remember, what happened, and you can put it in exactly as is. Um, but he's like, no, no. So I respected that and I kind of wrote around it. But actually, something recently happened after we initially chatted. Um, there's a temple that we're very close to um, in the US that basically, when someone passes, you can put a photo of them in the temple. The idea is to for that spirit to hear these prayers that, the Buddhist monks and nuns like do on a daily basis. And this very, very close Buddhist nun to us, she's like, oh, we're starting to have, I think, a more, I guess, durable way of keeping these photos here. So, can you send us a digital photo of your son? And then, we'll put that up. And, we sent over the photo that I actually used in the book, and they touched it up to make it look more refreshed, as in the photo. I'm not sure if you noticed, but the photo had like, the typical things that you'd see in black and white older photos where it's a little like grainy. So we touched it up, made it look like less grainy, as if it was just a regular black and white photo taken now. Um, and I can see my dad like looking at it, just like really loving it. I feel like that was his sort of a way of holding him.
Yeah. I can't even imagine how your parents, like you're saying, blocked that part and everything that happened. And it's okay, not wanting to come back to it, not even reading the book. And it must have been brutal for you as well, just to put it in paper. Um, can I ask how old were you when you first knew about your brother?
I feel like the story was like always there. I can't remember when I knew I had an older brother. I think I always knew. And he was like he passed along the way, but I feel like it wasn't until I was an adult. So kind of along the lines of feeling that time was limited in any sort of sense, where like whether it's uh seeing my nieces grow, they're only young for so long, seeing my parents age, I think with that sort of I guess life experience, you feel a lot more for how difficult that would have been versus when I was younger. I think knowing I had a brother who passed, like it felt more abstract than really like how hard would it be to lose a child.
Of course, yes. And there's a lot of realities we don't fully understand until we're adults. So I obviously don't understand the pain, but I see what you're saying, that as you were older and you could see more of that and understand it more.
Well, I think also because as a child, and even growing up into my teenage years, like luckily I didn't have a lot of experience with loss, direct loss. I think it would probably be a lot different if I had known him and lost him. Versus, I was born basically 3 years after they lost him. So I go through that grief with them, nor did I experience the grief directly when it happened. So I think that made it more abstract because, my sister and we had his photos, right? Like we knew, oh, we had an older brother, he passed, but it does feel more abstract, I think, until, you know, you're a parent yourself, or you start seeing life in a different way, like, or you experience loss in your life, uh, regardless of age. I think it's, at least for me, I felt like I didn't really connect to that loss emotionally until I was older.
Right. Um, and I'm curious on how were your parents with you and your sister when you were younger? Meaning, you think they were more protective of you?
100%. And they also have a very, like, um, probably not a very rational fear of like the ocean. Like, my brother passed on their journey over. So, through the ocean and, through the sea. And so I know they have a very big fear about, us going too far. Like, when we go to the beach or like my nieces, like, oh, stay closer. Like, we don't have a lot of luck with water, like, that sort of thing. Like, they're very superstitious. At least my mom is. But, and I think having gone through losing a child, like, I know we've gone through a lot of surprisingly, I call it kind of near death experience, or potentially could have been very uh, traumatic experiences, like causing great injury. But we've kind of got through them. And, I think they probably held a fear that, all parents are going to be afraid for their child and, be more protective. But I think having lost a child already, I can imagine that that fear is probably amplified. Like, okay, I don't want to go through that again.
What happened?
When I was in grade 5, I was coming home from school and, we took a school bus, and normally when the bus stops for students to get off, they pop out the stop sign. So cars stop. And I must have been very unlucky because there was a group of students that went ahead of me. I was kind of in the middle of the pack, and there were still students that were following behind me. But a car decided to pass the bus and hit me on the way. And the cops, like in the police report, had told my parents that had he not slowed down or got just even like a little bit faster, like I probably would have died. Um, or when I went to a wedding with a friend of mine, we were driving. Um, like this, not so much because I told them like after the fact, like, oh wow, like this happened. But my friend and I were driving. If you've ever driven down the east coast of the U.S. From like around New York to like Philly, there's a lot of like mountainous areas, and typically it's like 2 lanes. And we were driving next, like basically it was like the mountainside, us, and then this tractor trailer truck, and then you basically have the cliff. And I remember I just felt very uncomfortable driving there. I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna zoom past him. Like I don't feel like I want to be next to this guy. And as soon as I passed him, we heard like an explosion. My friend and I. She was a passenger, so she actually looked back. But I just quickly like checked my rear view mirror, and it looked like one of the wheels on the truck had blown out, and he crashed into the mountain. And we were just thinking, like, wow, like if I had not just sped past him, like he would have crushed us into the mountain. Um, or even my sister, like she's gotten into a couple of really bad accidents as well, where, on the one, like we live in a very cold area. So there's a lot of black ice. And this one time she was right at the exit of where we live, and she must have hit a patch of it, but she spun out. But luckily, like the car, like we're in a busy area too, but she didn't get hit by any other cars. Like, so we've had several incidents like this. And, not that we're purposely trying to get ourselves there so our parents would worry, but, like they worry extra because of all of that. I think, like, just inherently, like parents do, but I think I won't be surprised if there's that extra layer because of the loss that they had.
Right. Yes. Till this day, they're
Yeah.
like that too. Yeah.
Yeah, like to all of us, like my brother-in-law, my nieces, like everybody that's like close to them.
Yeah. Yes. You can imagine it. Understandable as well. Um, it, you mentioned in the book that you've been 3 times to Vietnam in your life, and I'm curious what's that been like for you, and have you gone with your parents? I think you mentioned this also in the book.
Yeah, so all 3 times with my parents. So the first time was in 1990 when Vietnam initially opened up the borders. It's kind of funny because it was the first time that they came back having thought that this would never happen. And the family thinking that, this would never happen. So someone actually hired a videographer, and it was one of the videos that we just got digitized. So it was funny to see how chaotic it was, for the first few flights coming in through Vietnam back then. Yeah, I would have just turned 8 at that point because we went during summer break. So I was 8 and my sister was, I think, almost 2. Um, and, it was our first time really abroad. Going to the US is fairly simple, very similar to Canada, but this is Vietnam, very different. And I think for someone, a child that grew up in Canada, you just, there's a lot of everyday life things over there that's very different. The thing that always stands out to me is like the toilets. It's the squat toilets. And, I still remember walking in, asking my mom, "How do I use this thing? Like, is there a direction? Which way to like how?" So there was a lot of that, like just anxiety, I think, as well. Like anxiety of like this isn't home. Like I don't know anything. Like I can speak the language, but I just don't know anything about this. Then the next time we went back was 2016, and this was after my sister got married. So her husband was in tow. And being much older now, it was nice to, see the family experience more of the foods. Like you appreciate it so much differently than as an 8-year-old child. Um, and then this most recent time in 2024, we went back and, this time with my sister's kids. And it was interesting to like, they were, a little bit younger than I was. And her youngest was the same as her when we went. But it's interesting to see, them going through it as well. So it's a weird, it felt like a very, weird, like circle, how it kind of looped back.
And what is it like for your parents to go back?
It's it's always interesting because we spend a lot of time with family. You people go to Vietnam, they tour the country, they want to see the sights. For us, it's always okay. Hometowns of both sides. A lot of time with the siblings. Like my dad still has siblings. The first, not the first time, but like that middle time in 2016. My mom's sister was still alive, so a lot of time with her. Um, and this more recent time when we came with my nieces, I think just inherently and, just back to that time on life. It's like, let's spend the time with the people. Like, the focus is the people. Let's spend time with my sisters, with their kids, and that was, I think for them, like that was all they wanted. Like they didn't need to see the sites or anything like that. My mom, we took a special trip up to where my grandma eventually became a nun, like, in her later years. We went all the way up to, it's called Dilac, and it's, uh, for the transportation was just a very long drive up, but we spent like the full day driving up to this kind of more mountainous, I guess more French colonial vibe area, where she was a Buddhist nun at. So we visited the temple, and you know that sort of was
Yeah,
the hope of that trip.
I would love to go. Never been.
Well, you'll have to let me
Yes.
know.
um, uh, One more thing that I wanted to touch on the book that also stood out to me is that you write that your parents believe in creating good karma, and to protect their children. How was this taught to you as a child or as an adult, or is this something that they consistently mentioned the idea of forgiveness in their own life, in your life?
I feel like my parents often demonstrated it. Like, they'll say it, but it was a lot of actions. You know, they've lived a very, like, lots of highs, lots of lows. Um, you know, and in a lot of instances where we're like, why would you be okay with this? Why are you so friends with this person? Like, why would you help them? And a lot of times we're like, well, like either one, people make mistakes, or two, circumstances. And I'll, like, I'll see things where it'll be like a business partner taking advantage of them, or a friend taking advantage of them. But they're always like, or, even when when my sister had her accident, and it was like through no fault of, like, us. It was the other driver. Um, you know, Typically when it comes down to it, a lot of it is financially motivated or monetary. And my dad's always like, where you can forgive, you should. Like, you know, like, money you can always make. But where you can forgive, you should. And that's been everything that they always say that. But they also demonstrate it, right? Like, even a business partner that took advantage of them, 5, 10 years later, they're like, oh, I need your help on this tax issue. And my dad would, like, give it to him for free. And they're like, well, why would you do that? And he's like, well, that person was under these circumstances, like, it wasn't great what they did, but you should have more grace. Um, because, you carry that around at the end of the day, like, it's just not worth it. And the belief in karma, in that, you know, whenever something bad happens to us, so, like, me, um, being able to heal very well after being hit by a car, being able to outrun that truck, or my sister surviving all of her, like, crazy crashes. My dad's like, it's probably the times that we didn't really, choose to just go at it with someone, right? Like, we just forgave them, moved on, and, we let it be. Because, when you do good out there, like, good returns. And also it pays it forward. Like, my parents are always like, hey, if you're able to, my dad always helped temples, with their financial things. His background is an accountant. So, where he could, that's where he would offer it. And, he kind of taught us that, where you can give back as well, right? Like, if you're lucky enough to experience everything that, you have everything that you have, then, there's so many others out there that don't. So, you should pay for it, and you never know what that other person might do, right? So I know when I had my own trademark practice, depending on the startup, like, if I thought, oh, this could really help, forget the fee, I'll just file that for you, right? Like, you just don't know what lies ahead and how it'll be returned, like, directly to you or to, like, the community in general.
Right. Mm, I love that.
Yeah, so that's his philosophy, but also he lived it. So it was easy to follow.
Yes, and they're very resilient, which is related as well. So you want to start your own practice, you said?
At that point, I did.
Okay. Not now. I want to give time to also talk about an important topic, which is you coming out at the age of 42. And well, you don't mention this in the book. Well, of course, it's way later, but I want to understand how did it feel coming out to yourself and coming out to your parents? Because to your family it was at 42, but to yourself, when was that?
To myself, I feel like COVID was a turning point for me. So to
Mm,
myself, around that time as well. I think so. Part of the reason why I didn't mention it in the book, although I did hit on, like, couples getting together that were not looked upon very well. So either you're from, rivalry families. My dad's family's technically from the north. My mom is fully south, but like there was little bit of a tension there, and so kind of there is that linkage. But like the story was theirs, and I didn't want to sort of mix in too much of something else. But I think for me, during COVID, like because everything was a lot quieter and slower, I think that gave me a lot of time to reflect on myself as well. Seeing how, I was lucky in that, a lot of the men that I met, whether it was through online dating or through family, through friends, were very decent people. People who, if, by checklist, good career, good guy, good family, potentially good father, things like that. It hit everything. But and some of the guys I remember really in connecting with, like, we had a great time. Like I can totally hang out with these people. And I just couldn't understand why I couldn't connect with them romantically. And initially, so as I was growing up, I think I felt like maybe something was different. Like I was always a tomboy, but yeah, I wasn't a big fan of being very girly. But I thought, well, whatever. There's a ton of girls out there that are like me, and you just go through life. Like, things may change, who knows? And I think as I got older and then into undergrad, I started thinking, okay, well, maybe I might have an interest in women. And in my head, I was rationalizing it as, okay, well, I may have an interest here. I'm kind of, yeah, I find some guys attractive. So maybe I'm bisexual. So, but why make my life harder and purposefully try and find a partner that is a woman? Like, why not try find a partner that's a man and, don't need to tell anyone about it. You're just going to move on through life as everyone expected. Um, so it wasn't until COVID where I'm like, this is weird. Like I'm meeting all these like checklist guys, it's not working. And I think I had to really slow down and take the time for myself. Like, career was on pause at that point. I wasn't distracted by that. We couldn't go out. I could just hang out with friends. And it was really a time for me to look inside. And I think I realized then that maybe why it wasn't working out was, and I understand it's like a spectrum, as well, but I never gave myself a chance to pursue women. Like I said, oh, well, if it happens, but it can't realistically happen unless I'm kind of open to it. So I think I needed to somehow like make that switch, like frame it differently to open myself up to, okay, let's really give this a shot. And essentially, like a couple of years later, I met my current girlfriend. So I feel like I couldn't have made that step unless I was willing to say, hey, you need to really be okay with the alternative, because it was always like, oh, the side thing. Like here, like I should be focused here, but it's a side thing. It comes along great, if not whatever. But like the focus is here. And I think it was like somehow saying, well, no, 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 no. Like it should come into focus too. It shouldn't just be this like side, like bit in my sort of framing for myself.
Hmm. And as you were thinking about all this, you were going through it alone. You didn't go through a friend or someone to talk about it.
Like, so my really close friends, in hindsight, a lot of my friends always said, we kind of figured, but, since you couldn't figure it out for yourself, just let you go. Um, but then also, I think some of my friends by like the undergrad, sort of early adulthood, time frame, I did tell them, oh, I have an inkling, but well, nothing serious, but like it's just easier. So if you guys know any guys, like, like introduce me, because, that's where my focus is. Like, I want to get married. So, um, I think it was a lot of that, but like the really close friends, and I'm talking about maybe like a handful of friends that I actually told. Um, and in telling them, it wasn't even like a, yes, I'm interested in women. It like even there, that was, oh, like that weird bifurcation of this world that I had in my head. I needed that quiet to really ask myself these questions.
Yes, and even if you have that quiet, a lot of people don't even get to it. So yeah. Mhm. Uh, I'm 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 curious also on how you met your girlfriend, and was it the first relationship that you fully open up to
Yeah,
with a
yeah,
woman?
100%. I think when I realized that, that this could be a viable option, I thought like, wow, how am I gonna meet anyone? So I tried online dating, and I actually messaged her on Twitter. Like I started with a book, because, we were following like, a new author as well. And especially with my book, like, I was interested in how like people published and new authors, and we were following the same person. And yeah, a lot of her comments under the posts and stuff just seemed like they aligned with like where I was. So I kind of messaged her on the side and like, oh hey, and that's sort of how we started talking. And that was early in 2022, and then it was going to be my 40th birthday. And my one of my good friends and I, we were going to go to Milan, and I thought, oh, okay, why not? She's Swiss, and I thought, oh well, if it's close, like, why don't we meet up? And when we met up, we clicked just as well in person, and we just kind of took it from there and did this long distance thing, and it helped a lot because I ended up moving to London soon after. So closer proximity, closer time zone. So it's easier to fly back and forth. It's much more difficult now and costly. But it was a lot easier during our like beginning phases of the relationship. And I think that that was probably really important to, get us to be able to do this distance now and time zone difference.
Where does she live?
She's still in Switzerland. She's still in Switzerland. Yeah. So we do quite a bit of flying back and forth.
Yes, I imagine. How long you been together at this point?
So as of what, we're 2026 now, so coming up to 4 years in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, amazing. And you told your parents a couple years into the relationship.
Yes.
Hmm.
So I remember I told my friends much earlier. And I didn't tell my sister until before I was already told my parents. So almost like, that's like the family nuclear. So I felt like, when I tell my sister, like that's when it's going to be very real in my family. So I used to tell myself, oh, it feels serious. And I remember a lot of my friends were like, but how do you tell if it's serious? But I think for me, like when I knew that I loved her, I felt like I couldn't keep that from the people that I love. And it was scary because your family loves you unconditionally. But, you know, is there a condition? So uh, it was like, oh, I feel like it'll be fine, but what if it's not? Like you hear so many stories where it's not, and it's very close, like family members. So, and then I knew my sister, and yeah, is very liberal and everything, and I figured, okay, like let's start easy and like tell her first. So I went and I told her, and like she was totally fine with it. I'm like, okay, I haven't told mom and dad yet, but I'm thinking like timing wise, like maybe this would be the perfect time. And it didn't help that I was in London. So I didn't want to do it over video. Like I wanted to do it in person. So it had to be on one of my trips. And then what time? And usually on my trips, it's like for a birthday or for, something. And I'm like, okay, it's a celebration. I want to tell it before. If I tell it too late before I go home, like what if they have questions? So it was a lot of like fear along with the logistics of it. Um, that I think was part like I kind of wonder, is it the logistics, like, was it part of the fear too, to be like, okay, it can't be Christmas because it's like Christmas, or it can't be so and so's birthday because then like what if, it distracts from the birthday, or like the anniversary. Like, you could come up with anything. Like there's never that perfect moment. Um and so when it finally happened, I remember like I just so happened to be, I feel like my niece was there. I feel like it was my parents, me, and like my niece must have been playing, in the room or somewhere there because we were just sitting there. I don't think we'd sit there randomly like that. And internally, I think I was trying to psych myself up to how do I even start? Because we're just sitting there. Um, it, it's not going to naturally come up, but it was the only kind of quiet moment because at that point, my sister had only just had her third child. So she was, a couple months and, she has like two other young children. So it's always like just chaos. And, I planned it with my sister too. And she's like, "Ooh, if you do it over there, it's going to be like this. If you do it over here," like there was a lot of like things to consider, and distractions when you have like just a busy household as well. Like I also wanted my parents to be able to digest it to some level. Um, so I think I worked myself up and, um, I opened. So I was trying to be strategic about it in that as my girlfriend visited me, I would, before telling them, I would say, "Oh, this friend's coming, right? To visit," or, "Oh, I'm going on a ski trip with this friend." So like she kinda is in the picture. So when I went to tell them, it was in Vietnamese. And I think I said something along the lines of, "Oh, that friend that to visit or that friend that I went on a ski trip, we're together," like something along those lines. And I think, you know, my mom was trying to process like, like, what does that mean? And then I think my dad processed a little bit quicker. But his reaction was like, I think he needed time because his immediate reaction was, "Okay, I don't want to talk about this," and then he like left the room. Like he didn't yell, he didn't like say anything, but I can tell he needed like time. Um, and then my mom, I think, was trying to understand, like, what do you mean? Right. And like, we're dating. And she did ask a couple more questions about my girlfriend, but then I think I forget what it was, but she also kind of like excused herself too. And then my sister happened to be in the other room. And then I went up and like, oh my God, I told them that like they need time. Um, but being a very pragmatic family, I think I had a grocery run that I had to do for the family. So I'm like, okay, I'll go get groceries. Now, so I kind of left, to do what I was supposed to do. And when I came back, I remember my sister saying, "Oh yeah, so like mom and dad kind of came down after you left to ask more about to see if like I knew, um,
Yeah.
and what I thought about it, and like if I've met her or if like all of these things." And at that point, she hadn't met anyone yet. Um, and so I feel like, so my parents have always like they don't like to upset us either, or make us sad or anything like that. So I do wonder if part of it was, okay, they need to process. It was very nice to have my sister as like a buffer point because some things I feel like they might have been afraid, okay, if I ask her this, like, is that going to upset her? Like, is this, so it's easier to like, okay, go through the sister. I'm going to ask her what I can and, understand this a little bit more. So I think that it was very, like, I'm very grateful to my sister. Like, I think she really made the process easier. Um, but when I came back from groceries, it was almost like nothing. Like we didn't really talk about it anymore. Um, and whenever my girlfriend would visit me in London, so I call my parents all the time, every day on FaceTime, when I was over there. And, my sister calls us every day. Like, so it's like we're very connected. And so whenever my girlfriend visits, I would have her on the call with me because I'm like, I want this to be normal, the usual,
Yeah.
them to get used to it. Like they're, uh, in our culture, at least as far as I can tell, like we're not a lot of like PDA, like we don't show a lot of, they don't outright say, "Oh, I love you," like that we're used to a lot in like Western culture, but they show it through like more actions. So, I knew that they likely wouldn't be outright saying, "Oh, we accept her." I kind of realized that early on, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna try and be culturally respectful because I probably barely seen my parents kiss more than a handful of times, maybe a couple times. So I know like there's a certain way to navigate some of that, and I want to be okay. They haven't disowned me. They didn't kick me out of the family or anything like that. So, let me approach this as delicately and respectfully with them as I can as well, right? Like, I don't want to be doing something where it might put them in an uncomfortable situation because I feel like even if I were dating a guy, like I wouldn't be making out with him in front of them either. So just those sorts of like things I had to kind of say, you know what, like it's not personal. It's not, it's cultural too and traditions and, just to be mindful of that. Um, and so with my girlfriend, every time she'd come, I'd have her online with me, I'll, say hi and they get used to it. Right. And then so I came out to them in August and then in, April of that following year, she came for her first visit and she actually stayed at our place. Although they don't outright say certain things, but they'll like I know that they've kind of opened up their arms and heart to her by simply just basic things like, when she visits, like, my mom will cook for her or my dad will ask how her family's doing, or how's she doing in work, right? Or whenever I'm like, oh, I'm gonna talk to her. Oh, okay. When I'm done, I'll go down. They're like, oh, how is she doing? Like, is there anything new? And they know that, we're thinking about marriage in the future and they'll ask about stuff like that. Right. So a bit more pragmatic and like practical than on an emotional level, I would say.
Wow. The way you were extremely careful of telling them, I understand, but it's a lot, and I think part of it reflects also how you want to be very careful with their emotions, but also you want to be careful of yours and how their opinion of that could affect either your relationship or yourself. So it must have been terrifying at the same time, even though, of course, they love you, like you said, unconditionally, but
Is there a condition?
yeah,
Yeah.
is there a condition to the love? But um, yeah, they show the love in the way that you're saying, not like in the most obvious. Yes, I love you. Everyone is welcome, but in their own ways, and yeah, that's valid. That's part of Vietnamese culture as well. That people are draw their boundaries more.
I think so. Like I'm trying to think to sort of even family friends of their generation. Like I don't think there's a lot of affection, like physical affection that we see, like let's say regular Western culture, or even like in my generation, like sort of our generation. I think it might be media influence, culturally influenced, like influenced somehow. But I think definitely once we got to my generation, I think people are a lot more comfortable showing affection. But for some reason, at my parents' generation, and it could be the immigrant experience too, like, maybe my dad would have got my mom more flowers, but, we just didn't have the money, right? Like, there's a lot of those things too that eventually we don't get each other flowers. We get each other shampoo. Right?
Yeah.
It's it's interesting how, and this might be like super abstract, but I do sometimes wonder if a lot of it is just influenced by their experience. Um, you know, it's we barely make any money. And my dad would always say, yeah, like, we'd send money back home. I'm like, oh my, like what money? Like we didn't have any money, but they managed to feed us, clothe us, like put a roof over our heads and save enough to send back home. Right. Like I think then becomes very practical. And, it goes into how we were raised as well. We were raised to be very, like, you don't go and become an artist. Like, if you become an artist, you're not gonna have any money. And how are you gonna feed yourself? How are you gonna, like, where's that security? Whereas I think with my generation, my cohort, because we've been privileged enough to go through the system, um, and even so, like, I'm sure a lot will say that even the system we go through isn't necessarily the system that a lot of other folks go through, where their parents were not immigrants, right? So we navigate through a slightly different system, but an easier system than maybe our parents did. And, we have certain perks that they never experienced. So we are able to say to our children, like, my sister can say to her children, hey, if you have a passion and you want to follow it, try it. Whereas my parents were, no, like you're going to be like, you should think about being an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor. Like these are stable jobs. They will provide for you and your family. And that's all that they thought about. You get here, you have to figure out a way to make it work. And that trickles down into how we were brought up as well.
Right. Yes. And that's what they knew. And like you're saying, how they raised you, and you know different things than they do. And your nieces will know different things. And it's, but yes, with immigrant parents, and I don't have any immigrant parents, but I understand all that weight that they carry with them. I feel like you feel it more in you because of that. And yeah, as I'm doing these interviews too with child of immigrants as well, I noticed that there's a feeling of I owe them so much. And mostly as adults, you realize a lot of things that they went through, and you carry them with you for better or for worse. But yes. I wanna finalize with one question, Twee. What's making you most happy these days? And also, by the way, I wanna do a part two when you plan your wedding. That would be
For sure, for sure.
yes, with your future fiance. I think that would be that would be amazing. But yes, what's making you most happy these days in your regular life?
Um, I feel like it's like the everyday things. Just like watching TV with my parents, visiting my sister as often as I want. She's only 2 hours away. Um, you know, seeing my nieces grow like into their own personalities, right? Like I think I missed out on a lot of the youngest one's personality in her first couple of years because I was in London. But like the oldest one, she's like always about fairness. The middle is always about like just so detailed and particular, and then the youngest is like the troublemaker. Humor.
Yeah.
And even like as I'd like to see my girlfriend as often as I can and, with the distance, but just, you know, like she's coming over next week and I think it'd be nice to just cook a meal with her or, sitting on a bench, like just everyday things. Nothing spectacular.
What do you watch on TV with your parents?
Oh, so they're really into, and I think this helped with our Vietnamese as well. They're really into like the Asian dramas, but like dubbed in Vietnamese. So, when we were young, we were growing up with like these martial art, Hong Kong martial art drama series, but it was dubbed in Vietnamese. So we actually picked up a lot of like, old idioms and things like that in like Vietnamese from that. So yeah, so a lot of that they still really love that stuff. So I'll like sit there
Yeah.
and watch them.
It's- um, Thank you, Twing. Thank you for all your time. Really appreciate it, and for sharing parts of the story. I'll put the link as well of the book so people can read. And I I loved it. I think it shows how careful you were with it and with the story, and how respectful you are of your own family story. And I really appreciate it. I know talking about this is hard as well. So thank you.
No, thank you for the opportunity to share. And it's really a pleasure chatting with you.
Same here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. This really reminded me of how easily family stories can be lost if we don't take the time to ask questions. Thu's book is not only a tribute to her parents' resilience, but a reminder that these stories are worth preserving. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and leave us a review. You can find Thu's book and all of her links in the show notes. This episode was edited by Sydney at Beyond Link, and the link is also in the show notes. And thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.